Good afternoon or morning or whenever you're watching this. Hi, folks. This is Mr. Fox. Probably winter break when you're watching this. I'm planning on assigning this. And what the plan is for today is to talk a little bit about language families. And this will probably make a little more sense once we start into the language unit. But I wanted to give you this time to look at the concept of language families over winter break, because we just aren't going to have time to do it after winter break. So here goes. Let's go ahead and I'm going to share my screen and we're going to go ahead and get started. So what I'd like everybody to do, or you to do, is to turn to page 26 and 27 in your booklet. On pages 26 and 27, you're going to see some blank maps. You're going to see some maps that are shaded but not colored. What I would request you do now is stop the video and in a second, after I've given you the instructions, and you can see there's a key on this page in the lower left-hand corner of the booklet. And what I want you to do is I want you to go ahead and go to the pages 150 to 151 in your booklet, and in the textbook. And I think it's helpful to go ahead and using colored pencils and coloring the key to go ahead and create these maps in your booklet. Like I said, I think it's helpful to help you remember, keep track of what's going on. And so what I suggest, as I said a couple seconds ago, go ahead and stop the recording, create these maps, the ones on pages 150 and 151 in your textbook, recreate those in your booklet on pages 26 and 27. Go ahead and stop the video and do that now. Okay, now that you're back, let's go ahead and talk about some of these language families. So in your booklet, there is an assignment to do textbook reading about this. And I think you still need to do that, obviously, it's still important. But I think me talking about it is also helpful. I'm not gonna spend a ton of time talking about it, but like I said, I think it's helpful to kind of hear it from me, but also to read about it. So I'm going to start with the New World, the Western Hemisphere. And what's going on here, first of all, in your booklet, or in your textbook, I want to be clear that what's happening here is you can see, hopefully you can see this, your textbook talks about the language families with at least 9 million native speakers. So according to your textbook, I think there's about 15 of those. So 15 language families. And as we'll talk about once we get back to school, language family means it's just the biggest kind of category of how you split up languages, all the languages in the world. And so language families are important to kind of keep track of where they are around the world. Has a lot to do with lots of other things we're going to study related to culture. So anyway, in the Western Hemisphere, you can see that there are only 2 language families that have more than 9 million speakers, okay? So to be clear, that doesn't mean there aren't more language families. You can see here, the green is what they're calling other. So those are other language families that are just have a fewer numbers of speakers. And of course, these are people who would be speakers of Native American languages. Up here in the up in Canada and Alaska, these are Native people, and there's different language families up there. And of course, there's also there's Native American languages throughout the United States. There's just so few of them that they didn't show up on this map, except the reservations probably around like the Navajo reservations in Arizona. And then of course, some people of the Amazon. Those people have their own language families that are just too small to be considered on this map. But the 2 that are in the Western Hemisphere are, of course, Indo-European. And this is one we're going to spend quite a bit of time talking about. But Indo-European is this beige color. And you can see, like I said, we'll talk much more about Indo-European, but Indo-European languages include English, Spanish, French up in Canada, Spanish in Latin America, Portuguese in Brazil, more Spanish in the rest of Latin America. Just to be clear, these places that do show up in green, these people still probably speak English as well, but they do speak in many cases a native language. Same thing down here. People often speak both Spanish or Portuguese and a native language. So just keep that in mind. And then the other language family that's here in the Andes Mountains is called Quechuan. And Quechuan is this purple language family. And it is the language, it's kind of a leftover, these are the native people that, natives that once made up the Inca Empire. And so there are still a lot of people that are still there from that era. And these people speak a language called, a language family called Quechuan. And of course, within the Quechuan language family, there are a lot of languages within that family. And so those are the two language families you still see with quite a few members or speakers in the New World. Okay, so now I want to shift over, and hopefully you've done this. I want to look at the language families in the or sometimes called the Old World. And of course, I do want to once again draw your attention to Indo-European. Indo-European is by far the most widely spoken language family in the world. You can see, we've already talked, obviously there's a lot of languages in Europe, and that's where the European part of Indo-European comes from. Of course, English and German and French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese are just some examples. Russian is also an example of an Indo-European language. Many people speak that. You'll also see in the Indo part of Indo-European is the languages spoken in and around India, right? India, they speak Hindi. In Pakistan, they speak a very similar language to Hindi called Urdu. Up in northern India, there's a language called Punjabi. And of course, in Iran, they speak a language called Farsi, which is related. Again, all of these languages are related to each other. They're all Indo-European languages. And we'll talk, again, a lot about how they've kind of split off and are related in other ways. The other places on this map that do speak a lot of Indo-European are, of course, English in Australia and New Zealand, and then English and a variation of Dutch in South Africa, which is they call it Afrikaans, which is a variety of Dutch, okay? So that's Indo-European. So you can see it's not only the most widely spoken language family, it also has its most widely kind of distributed around the world, okay? The next one I want to draw our attention to is, because it's the second biggest in terms of speakers, is what's called Sino-Tibetan. And of course, Sino, for those of you who know this, is a prefix meaning Chinese. So this pink area is called Sino-Tibetan. And you can see, obviously, within that, there are all the different Chinese languages that are spoken in China and in other places. And of course, Chinese has many languages that are come under that umbrella. Most importantly, Mandarin, which is like the kind of universal Chinese language of most of China. It's the language that Chinese people learn in school. It's the language, if you're studying Chinese in other countries, that would be the variety of Chinese you would probably learn. But within Sino-Tibetan, there are other languages as well. Obviously, the other part of this is Tibetan. So here in Western China, these people speak Tibetan. And of course, they're a different ethnic group. They are not the same as we've learned in Eastern China. Those people are called Han Chinese, or at least many of them are Han Chinese. And then the Tibetans are a different ethnic group. So that's Sino-Tibetan. The next one, and again, we're not going to talk necessarily about every single one of these, But the next one I want to draw our attention to is are the ones that these other ones that are also in other places in Europe. Okay, so Europe has a few languages that are not Indo-European, that are a different language group, and I'll draw your attention to the blue ones. Those are called Uralic languages. Okay, these are Uralic, and the Uralic languages in Europe include Finnish, Estonian, and Hungarian. And so those are the three Uralic languages that are actually in smack dab in Europe. They are, if you've ever been to Finland or Estonia or Hungary, if you look at the signs, they look nothing like the other signs or the other words. They have a completely different language family. And it's called Uralic because it's believed that they originated from kind of this area in Russia, which is where the Ural Mountains are. Those are called a Uralic language family. So Hungarian down here in Hungary, Finnish up here in Finland, and then Estonian here. And of course, these languages, you know, we could discuss, there's a lot of reasons for these different migrations of different people over thousands of years account for these different language families kind of being isolated and almost trapped kind of in the midst of another language family. Okay, so that's Uralic. And those are, again, smack dab in the middle of Europe, but not European languages. The next one I want to talk about is this one. It's called Altaic. Altaic is this kind of green, bluey green one. And it's important to note the most widely spoken language of Altaic is Turkish. And obviously that's spoken in Turkey. But there's also many of these people who are speak Altaic languages who are in Central Asia, so the Central Asian republics of Kazakhstan and other places, Mongolian, Uzbekistan, all these places. And of course, we talked a little bit about these people who are over here in Western China. These people are called Uyghurs, and ethnically and linguistically, they're much more closely related to the Turkish people. And so they speak an Altaic language. And so all these languages are related to Turkish. And so ethnically and linguistically, these people are more related to Turks than, for example, Chinese. So that's called Altaic. The next one, and we're not going to talk about all of these, but one of the things that's kind of interesting is, according to your textbook and many linguists, Korean and Japanese get their own language families, and so that's kind of interesting. Both of them have borrowed heavily, in some cases, from Chinese, and there are some similarities, but they are given their own language families. So Korean and Japanese are separate and have their own language families. The next one I wanted to draw your attention is called Austronesian. And Austronesian is kind of interesting because it's potentially, besides Indo-European, it's the most kind of widely distributed. So Austronesian is very widely distributed. And you might go ahead and be jotting these things down on your map. I probably would. So what you can see is they're also mostly, what's interesting is it was mostly spread by through seafaring. And what you can see is many of these people live in islands. So many of the islands of the Pacific, in the South Pacific, and also in Indonesia and the Philippines. And then what's also interesting is way over here in Africa, here in Madagascar, they speak a language called Malagasy. And those people are actually more closely related linguistically to people who live way over here. So you can see, and ethnically, these people in Madagascar, even though they're closer to Africa, don't actually, at least for the most part, don't really, their lineage does not come from Africa. It actually comes from the islands in Southeast Asia and the South Pacific. So that's kind of interesting. So it's owing mostly to their seafaring ways. Okay, the next place I want to go is just briefly talk about this one called Austroasiatic. By the way, the prefix, just so you know, the prefix Austro, like in Australia, or if you've taken my anthropology class, Australasia Australopithecines. Austro means south, okay? So that's why Australia, it's the Southland. And so in this case, Austroasiatic means South Asia. Of course, this is actually Southeast Asia, but that's what this is. And so that's the languages of Cambodia and many parts of Vietnam, okay? So Austroasiatic. Probably not super important to note, but I think, you know, worth pointing out. The next place I want to go, I don't really have much to say about this yellow one here. Lots of people are speaking different languages in South China, here in places like Burma, or Myanmar, and parts of Thailand. And that's a language family called Tai Kadai. That's what your textbook calls it. I'll just tell you, when you learn about it in other textbooks, some language families, or some textbooks don't necessarily call it that, and sometimes you don't see this as a separate language family. But and just as a note, you know, there's disagreement about this. Linguists have lots of different criteria and different ways of deciding, is that a language family, or or should they be combined into one language family? And you know, linguistics is a really fascinating subject, but it's also one that you know, requires a lot of well, it has a lot of debate about what constitutes, you know, different languages or families and things like that. So it's just kind of interesting to consider. The next place I want to go real quickly is a place called India, where they speak Dravidian. So in South India, you can see here, they speak a language family called Dravidian. There's probably most noteworthy is in South India is called Tamil, and those people they both live in South India and also in Sri Lanka. So the Tamil language family, or language, is part of the Dravidian family. And we'll actually talk more about this when we talk about Hinduism. But it's believed that what happened over the course of hundreds of years is there were these waves of Indo-Europeans that came out of probably somewhere up and around here, and they pushed their way further and further, and they pushed the Dravidians into South India, whereas the Dravidians probably were in many other parts of India before. But this is believed to be a little bit of historical reasons for why Dravidian has been kind of pushed in the south, to the south. So to be clear, in India, they have two major language families, and they also actually over here have some Sino-Tibetan as well. So India technically has three language families and hundreds of languages, but three major language families with Indo-European, Dravidian here, and then some Sino-Tibetan. And they might even have a little bit of Tai Kadai in here as well. Can't really see where that starts and stops. And again, just to be clear, within these language families, there are, you know, in many cases, hundreds of different languages and totally distinct and unique languages. The next place I want to go to is Afro-Asiatic, and I always remember that because it's part Afro, which means Africa, and then Asia, Asiatic, so it's in Asia as well. So it's the one that spans both Africa and Asia. That's kind of how I remember it. Most significantly is you have Arabic. Okay, Arabic is the most important language of the Afro-Asiatic language family, and of course, it comes from this area, which was originally called the Arabian Peninsula, and the Arabs spread that out when you know, around the 8th century. We'll talk a lot more about that when we talk about religion. And the other language, so Afro-Asiatic is really closely associated with the two big languages are Arabic, and then the other big one is Hebrew. So because it's hard to see here in this map, but here in what is today Israel, they speak Hebrew. And so this is the language of historically Jewish people. And this is an important language, although very few speakers compared to Arabic. There's hundreds of millions of Arabic speakers, not nearly as many Hebrew speakers. But interestingly, despite the fact that there's actually a lot of conflict between the Jews and the Arabs, they actually speak a very similar language. They're in the same language family. Then you get down here and you see Nilo, this brown one is called Nilo-Saharan. And of course, the way I remember that is the Nile River comes down here, and that's the kind of the headwaters of the Nile River is where part of the language is spoken, but also out here in the Sahara Desert. So yeah, that's one of the major language families of Africa. You can see Africa has three major language families. So they have Afro-Asiatic, Nilo-Saharan, and then the last one is called Niger-Congo. And it's named after two important rivers. The Niger River that runs obviously from Niger. I believe it runs through Nigeria, but I'm not 100% sure about that. And then of course the Congo River, which primarily runs through Democratic Republic of Congo. But anyway, down here they speak lots of different languages, thousands of languages. And this is probably one of the areas with the most diversity of languages, because this is where humans first evolved. So there's lots of different languages there. In fact, and just generally in Africa, there's a lot of linguistic diversity. Down here, the green bit is another example of the other languages that don't fit into the Nile or Niger Congo. And some of the languages in this group, there's many language families there, but like if you've ever heard of the language that has the clicks, those are going to be down here in this and in these other language families that are only spoken by very few people. And of course, those languages are considered to be the most ancient. A lot of people can think that the language with the clicks, which is called the Khoisan language, is maybe one of our earliest languages. And then we all have lost those sounds in our language since humans left Africa. In the Niger-Congo language family, probably the most important language is a language called Swahili. And this is spoken by many people in the area, and it's considered, and we'll come back, this is called a lingua franca. And I will, of course, explain what that means when we come back to school. But it means generally it's a language spoken by lots of people in order to communicate on a daily basis, especially for people who don't speak the same language. Okay, so folks, hopefully that is somewhat informative. You got some things jotted down about what I consider to be some of the most important features of the different language families. Hopefully you were able to jot down a few notes on pages 26 and 27. And you have a better understanding of where these different languages families are, what they're all about, and all of that. So again, hope you're having a great winter break. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the new year. All right. Bye-bye. Let me see him. Okay. Bye-bye.